Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another episode of Wacky Wednesday, a weekly series where we explore wacky deck ideas in both Standard and Modern, and this week we're taking a look at Pia's Revolution in Standard. Pia's Revolution is a 3-mana enchantment that says, whenever a non-token artifact is put into our graveyard from the battlefield, return that card to our hand unless target opponent has Pia's Revolution deal 3 damage to them. So Pia's Revolution is known as a Punisher card, which is a card that gives the opponent a choice, which usually isn't very good, since whenever you give your opponent a choice, they're going to make the one that works out best for them. But in this case, we're trying to build a deck around Pia's Revolution so that both of the opponent's choices will be bad for them. So there's a lot of different moving pieces in this deck to try and make all those synergies come together. And another very important card in the deck is 4 copies of Scrap Trawler, a 3-mana 3/2 artifact creature that says, whenever Scrap Trawler or another artifact we control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, we get to return to our hand target artifact card in our graveyard with a lesser converted mana cost, which means that let's say a 2-mana artifact goes to the graveyard, then we can return a 1 or 0 mana artifact from our graveyard back to our hand and kind of get that value chain going. And you can see how Scrap Trawler goes nicely with Pia's Revolution in a deck that's trying to sacrifice all types of different artifacts. So let's take a look at our entire deck, starting out with our 1-drops, where we have 4 copies of Implement of Combustion, a 1-mana artifact that we can sacrifice for a single red mana to deal 1 damage to the opponent or one of their planeswalkers, and when Implement of Combustion is put into our graveyard from the battlefield, we get to draw a card. So regardless of how the implement got sacrificed, we will get to draw that card. And you can see how Implement of Combustion synergizes nicely with Pia's Revolution, since the opponent will have to face a decision of taking a total of 4 damage to keep the implement in our graveyard, or just take 1 damage, but then we get to return the implement back to our hands, where we get to sacrifice it again to keep drawing more cards and dealing more damage. And of course, if our opponent does decide to let the Implement of Combustion go to the graveyard by taking the 3 extra damage from the Pia's Revolution, then there's a good chance we can return it from the graveyard back to our hand through the use of Scrap Trawler, since we have a lot of 2 and 3 mana artifacts that we can also sacrifice to get a 1-mana artifact from our graveyard back to our hand. Next up we have 4 copies of Renegade Map, a 1-mana artifact, enters the battlefield tapped, and we can tap and sacrifice the Renegade Map to search up a basic land to put into our hand. So yet another 1-mana artifact that we can easily sacrifice for value, and of course Renegade Map also helps us fix our mana and kind of counts as a land, which is why we only have the 20 lands alongside 4 Renegade Maps. Then we get to our 2-drops, where we have 4 copies of Implement of Malice, which we can sacrifice for a single black mana to make target player discard a card, and when Implement of Malice is put into our graveyard from the battlefield, we also get to draw a card, so very similar to the Implement of Combustion, but being a 2-mana artifact, that means that if we have a Scrap Trawler in play and sacrifice the implement, we get to return a 1 or 0 mana artifact from the graveyard back to our hand, as well as triggering the Pia's Revolution once again. Then we also have 4 copies of Servo Schematic, a 2-mana artifact that when it enters the battlefield or goes to the graveyard, we get to make a 1/1 colorless Servo artifact creature token. So unlike the implements and the Renegade Map, we can't easily sacrifice the Servo Schematic by itself, but there's a lot of other ways for us to sacrifice the Servo Schematic to generate that extra artifact token and to get our Pia's Revolution and Scrap Trawler synergies online. And speaking of ways to sacrifice artifacts, we've got 4 copies of Ravenous Intruder, a 2-mana 1/2 gremlin that has the ability to sacrifice an artifact at any point to get +2/+2 until end of turn. So this is a great way for us to help us sacrifice our artifacts, synergizes very well with Servo Schematic, and makes it so we can sacrifice our implements without having to pay the extra mana. So it's a little bit cheaper to keep looping our implements if we have a Pia's Revolution or a Scrap Trawler engine going. And of course the Ravenous Intruder can get in for a big chunk of damage, which will limit the opponent's options when it comes to taking damage from Pia's Revolution. Next up we have 4 copies of Reckless Fireweaver, which is a 2-mana 1/3 that says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under our control, Reckless Fireweaver deals 1 damage to each opponent. So this is another piece of the puzzle that can force our opponent into an unwinnable situation, since if we do have a Reckless Fireweaver in play, then the opponent's decisions with PS Revolution become even more difficult, since if they do choose to give us back the artifact into our hand, then that's an easy way for us to replay it and trigger the Reckless Fireweaver again, which will still deal damage to our opponent. And if we can combine a Reckless Fireweaver, PS Revolution and a Walking Ballista, we can also threaten to deal a lot of damage, since Walking Ballista is an artifact creature with double X in its mana cost, which means we can pay any amount for X, and Walking Ballista will enter the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it, and we can remove a +1/+1 counter to deal 1 damage to any target, and for 4 mana we can also put an additional +1/+1 counter on the Walking Ballista. So this is a nice way to deal some damage to the opponent's creatures or directly to the opponent, and it also counts as a 0 mana artifact for Scrap Trawler purposes. So if we sacrifice an Implement of Combustion with Scrap Trawler in play and there's a Walking Ballista in our graveyard, we get to return it. And so going back to our PS Revolution and Reckless Fireweaver synergies, we have the option of playing Walking Ballista for 0, so X will be equal to 0, which means Walking Ballista briefly enters the battlefield, which will trigger the Reckless Fireweaver, and then it directly goes to the graveyard, where the PS Revolution comes into play, and the opponent has the option of either leaving Walking Ballista in our graveyard and taking 3 damage, or letting us return Walking Ballista to our hand, where we get to do the same thing again. So the opponent is pretty much going to be forced to take the 3 damage, otherwise they just take another damage and we get to do the same thing again. So Walking Ballista will inevitably end up in our graveyard, where we can then easily return it back to our hand if we control a Scrap Trawler and sacrifice any artifact. So you can kind of see how all the moving pieces work together to assemble this inevitable damage engine. Then we also have 2 copies of Implement of Examination, a 3 mana artifact that we can sacrifice for a single blue mana to draw a card, and when the implement goes from the battlefield to the graveyard, we also get to draw a card. So this is a 3 mana artifact, which means that if we have a Scrap Trawler in play and we sacrifice the implement, we get to return either a 2, 1 or 0 mana artifact from our graveyard to our hand. So if we have both Implement of Examination, Implement of Malice and Implement of Combustion, we can first sacrifice Implement of Combustion, then sacrifice Implement of Malice returning Implement of Combustion, and eventually sacrifice Implement of Examination, getting back Implement of Malice, which will then also be able to get back Implement of Combustion one last time. So that's how all these implements work together with Scrap Trawler. With a Ravenous Intruder in play, we can cut on the cost of sacrificing the artifacts, and with the Reckless Fireweaver we get to deal an additional point of damage here and there. And with the PS Revolution, the opponent will also be faced with the decision of having us return the implement back to our hand, or simply take the 3 damage, which also works in our favor. So again, all of the pieces coming together to form this synergistic engine. Then of course our 4 copies of Scrap Trawler, and then a new addition from M19, Scion Master Thopterist, a 3 mana 1/4 legendary creature that says whenever we cast an artifact spell, we get to make a 1/1 Thopter artifact creature token with flying, and for 1 and a blue, we can sacrifice 2 artifacts to draw a card. So this gives us an additional way of sacrificing cards like Servo Schematic, and also be able to draw more cards. So looping all those artifacts with Scion play will create this incremental advantage, and those Thopter tokens entering the battlefield also synergizes very nicely with the rest of the deck, triggering cards like Reckless Fireweaver and giving us more fodder for Ravenous Intruder as well. Then of course we've got our 4 copies of PS Revolution and our Walking Ballista. Then quickly going over the mana base, we've got a single copy of Inventors Fair, which will gain us 1 life on our upkeep if we control 3 or more artifacts, and we can also sacrifice it to search up any artifact in our deck. Then we've got 4 copies of Zhalfirin Void, which lets us scry 1 when it enters the battlefield, so it gives us a little bit of card selection, and we don't really need a ton of colored mana in our artifact deck. We've got 2 basic islands, 5 basic mountains, and 2 basic swamps, which we can also search up with the Renegade Map. 4 copies of Spire of Industry, which can make any color of mana at the cost of 1 life if we control an artifact, and 2 copies of Spirebluff Canal, making both blue and red mana, and comes into play untapped if it's one of our first 3 lands. So that's the main deck. Let's take a quick look at our sideboard, where we have 2 copies of Hope of Ghirapur, a 1 mana artifact that we can also sacrifice if it dealt damage to our opponent to prevent them from casting any non-creature spells on the following turn. So another 1 mana artifact that we can easily sacrifice, which goes well with the rest of our deck and can be brought in against decks heavy on the non-creature spells, like control decks for example. We also have 2 copies of Duress against control and combo, 2 negates for the same matchups, 3 copies of Abrade to deal with creatures or artifacts, 2 Unlicensed Disintegration to deal with larger creatures, We've got 2 copies of Karn, Scion of Urza, which can either provide Karn advantage or can make those Karn struct tokens, which can also be a great win condition in a deck full of artifacts. And finally, 2 copies of Battle at the Bridge to be able to deal with indestructible creatures and maybe gain some life against the more aggressive decks. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play. And how about this hand? Seems fine. We've got Revolution, 2 of our synergy cards and an artifact to go along with those. And the mana to cast them. Turn 1 Lenor Elves. Could be a scary start from the opponent. Do have the option of just killing it with a Walking Ballista. Don't get the most value out of Ballista, but that's probably the safest play here. So we don't get overrun by an early start from the opponent. Alright, turn to Heart of Ghirapur. It's definitely an issue. Probably just playing the Revolution. And wait on the Implement until after we play a Reckless Fireweaver. But we might just get crushed here by our opponent curving out and hitting us repeatedly with Heart of Ghirapur. Don't have any great answers to Heart. Except for maybe Sai making Thopter tokens to chump with. Scrap Trawler was an interesting draw. I think we'll run him out there. So we have all the pieces we need, but we might just be too slow. And Thrashing Brontodon's also gonna rain on our parade, destroying the PS Revolution. So we could chump, get back Ballista. Taking 9 to 7 seems pretty sketchy. Yeah, this one's not looking good. I guess we're forced to chump. Alright, Servo Schematic. We're missing that critical 4th land, so we could double spell here. Guess we're just making the most mana efficient play we can, even though it's not gonna do much here. And a Sarkhan's Unsealing is the reason they're splashing red. Alright, so down to 8 we go. And there's land 4. I guess Fireweaver plus Schematic makes sense, since we don't really want to block with the Intruder when our opponent has a 5/5 indestructible Death Touch creature anyway. Yeah, we're gonna need to draw Sai pretty much right away here to have a chance, and Verger's Girolk. Opponent can crew Heart of Ghirapur, put the counters on it. They should have crewed the Heart of Ghirapur first, since now they no longer have the opportunity to put the counters on it. Although I guess with their opponent dealing 4 to us, Heart of Ghirapur's lethal by itself. So against the green deck, we definitely want access to Disintegration, Abrade to deal with Heart of Ghirapur, maybe kill a creature, and we could also consider Battle at the Bridge, since it can potentially take out a Ronas, but that requires a lot of mana as well. So 5 cards coming in for sure, and this is probably a matchup where we don't have time for Implement. I guess we can shave a bunch of Fireweavers, and maybe 1 Ballista. Try something like this. Would like to be on the play, and this hand seems pretty good. We're gonna be forced to play out the Servo Schematic on 2 to make blue mana for Sai. Alright, another Disintegration's good. Opponent says go, and we're just gonna play Sai here, I think. Guess we'll attack for 1 first. So our opponent off to a slower start this time around. And we have Sai to potentially make Thopter tokens to block Heart of Ghirapur, as well as having 2 answers. Thrashing Brontodon, that's fine. And another Servo Schematic. So don't really have to cast the Disintegration on the Brontodon, since the artifacts we have in play we don't really care about. Although it is nice that they don't get to sacrifice it in response to potential Disintegration here, but I think we hang on to it, and then this turn just go Schematic into Ravenous Intruder, and the Ravenous Intruder threatens to be pretty large here. And there's Sarkhan's Unsealing. Alright, so now we're probably fine killing the Brontodon, just so we can apply more pressure, prevent our opponent from ramping out the Galta, which could do a lot of damage here. Implements, nice too. So let's disintegrate this. And we might even have enough damage to kill our opponent here, we'll see. Sacrifice that one. So 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yeah, we can just kill our opponent here. Yep, that's lethal. Alright, sweet. So a nice turn 5 kill here, thanks to Ravenous Intruder and double Servo Schematic. So do we want to make any changes? Don't really have any great answers to Sargon's Unsealing to begin with. Duress and Negate are a bit too conditional, so I think we're fine the way we are. Drawing both our disintegrations was definitely pretty lucky. Alright, this hand could get there. Turn 1 Aether Hub into Llanowar Elves, yep. But that did use their energy, so they can't cast a Steel Leaf Champion here, even if they had it. So this looks like a turn 2 Intruder, turn 3 Schematic potentially. And wow, our opponent kept a 1-lander, so they could get punished here. Could also play Fireweaver first into Schematic, but that might be a little slow. Although we're not sacrificing the Schematic tokens right away, so I guess we might as well play Fireweaver first. Since we're definitely not sacrificing a bunch of artifacts on turn 3. So in that case we might as well maximize our damage. We are also stuck on 2 mana here, but we can cast some spells in the meantime. So we might actually want to play Implement and sacrifice it to draw a card in the hopes of finding a land. We did not, and attack for 1. Alright, opponent found the land, but it's a tapped one, and they're gonna get in for 1. And more non-land cards, unfortunately. Alright, so we had a promising start, but not drawing the lands definitely hurt. So now what? Do we play Implement again in the hopes of finding a land, or do we just play Ravenous Intruder here? I think we play Intruder and then hope to find a land next turn so we can go Servo Schematic into Implement. And Lightning Strike to take out Intruder, that's okay. Yep, that's unfortunate. So we could play Schematic first to avoid another Lightning Strike killing the Intruder, which is definitely a possibility since our opponent kept their hand for a reason. Maybe it's because they have multiple Lightning Strikes. So yeah, I could see playing Schematics first to then save our Intruder from a burn spell. Even though that way we don't get to attack with our Intruder next turn. Not drawing any lands here is unfortunate, but at least their opponent's struggling as well. And there's a Brontodon, and now they can crew the Heart of Ghirapur and get in for some serious damage. I'll definitely trade for the Llanowar Elves, but I don't think the elf is attacking here. So just Heart of Ghirapur getting in. And an Abrade to draw. So do we want to fire that off now so our opponent can't have Blossoming Defense, or do we keep it in hand to try and prevent more damage by blowing up Heart of Ghirapur after they crew it? Could also just play the Ravenous Intruder here, which is also reasonable. Yeah, I think I like playing Intruder. And then hope to draw a land at some point, so we can go Implement plus Abrade. Definitely should have attacked before playing the Intruder in case they had Blossoming Defense, since they could have blocked plus played Blossoming Defense. And it's gonna be a Ronas. So just hard attacking, that's fine. Ronas also means that Ravenous Intruder is no longer gonna be great. Alright, we found a land at least. So now what? We could play Sai, which can start making some Thopter tokens. We can play PS Revolution, but our opponent's probably just giving us back the artifact since we have all these cards in hand. Or we can go Abrade plus Implement. It's not clear what we should do here. I think Implement plus Abrade is probably the line here, since we can't afford to take more damage from the Heart of Ghirapur, and this way we get to be more aggressive with our Ravenous Intruder. Opponent's gonna crew the Heart of Kirin. So now we can actually Abrade the Heart, and they don't get to Blossoming Defense it. And so now they're probably forced to chump block with the land or elves. Otherwise they risk taking a lot of damage. Yep, that's fine. Alright, I think that's a good exchange for us. And now we have Servo tokens to block Ronas. And we can potentially play a longer game where we get to take advantage of Sai. Alright, they had a replacement heart. That's unfortunate. And another Brontodon. But Ronas is gonna stay back since they don't want us to attack with the Intruder. Alright, let's untap. And Island's an okay draw. So we probably just have to play Sai. And then next turn we can make a bunch of Thopter tokens with the implements. Although with Ronas they can give Heart of Kirin Trample as well. So that's not going to work out the way we want to. Do we have another option here? I don't think so. So yeah, let's just play Sai. And Sai plus Reckless Fireweaver can also do some damage here. So we'll say go for now. And then probably sacrifice the implement with its own ability. And a third Brontodon. Brontodon's actually not the end of the world against our deck, unless we have Pia's Revolution, since so many of our artifacts generate an advantage when they get destroyed. So Heart of Kirin's gonna rumble in. So we'll take 4. And end of turn sacrifice implements. Alright, Scrap Trawler is interesting. So what can we potentially do here? We can play a second Fireweaver and then just play a single artifact in Implement of Malice, but that's still not enough. Although I guess they have plenty of Brontodon, so they can actually destroy the Thopter token and prevent us from blocking. So we probably have to make multiple Thopter tokens here to have a chance at surviving. Which means our best line is probably Scrap Trawler plus Implement. Yeah, we're pretty close here, but the second Heart of Kirin is gonna get there just in time, I think. Since, yeah, we're pretty dead on board here. If they attack with Heart of Kirin, give it +2/+0 and trample, and then use 2 Brontodons to blow up both our Thopter tokens. And there's nothing we can do about it. We don't have any good attacks, so we're hoping our opponent doesn't see the line. And yep, they're gonna crew the Heart. Blow up a Thopter. I guess we should have sacrificed it to the Intruder here. Yep. And then Ronas can pump, and they have exactly enough mana to hit us for 6. So very close game here. If we had one more turn, we would have been able to win. One more life, and we probably win. Wow, our opponent let damage happen, so they did not pump with Ronas. Do they have a Lightning Strike to finish us off? No, Steel Leaf Champion. Okay. Well, now we might have to win. Let's see. So now we can play Fireweaver, sacrifice Servo Schematic. So yeah, Fireweaver into Implement. Trigger Sai, deals 2 to our opponents. And yep, we can sacrifice Servo Schematic, deals 2 to our opponents. And then we could also sacrifice Scrap Trawler and get back Servo Schematic, replay Servo Schematic, deal more damage to our opponent. And yeah, that's gonna do it. Awesome, so our opponent missed the line there with Heart of Kirin, and we managed to steal a win here. So on to the next one. Alright, we're on the play, and this hand seems acceptable. Got a lot of implements we can cycle to hopefully find more lands. Eventually a Scrap Trawler would be great in this hand. Alright, turn on Forest, no play. I think we just want to aggressively cycle these. Even though we have Pia's Revolution, just to make sure we can find our third land here. And turn to Thorn Lieutenant, that's fine. And we did find a land, that's nice. So do we play Implement or Revolution here? Probably Revolution. And then next turn we can sacrifice Implement. Plus play Implement of Malice if we miss on a land, otherwise we can Implement of Examination plus sacrifice it. So let's sacrifice Implement of Combustion and find a Scrap Trawler, that's exciting. Play Implement of Malice. And yeah, we've got all the pieces we need here. Just need some more lands to facilitate things. And there's a Vinemare. Gets blocked by Scrap Trawler, that's fine. And we can also chump it with a Servo Schematic token. And another Servo Schematic. I think we want to give ourselves a chance of drawing a land. So I'm gonna sacrifice Implement, and then we can also play a Servo Schematic to chump block Vinemare. Another Walking Ballista instead. Suppose we could also play Walking Ballista for 1 here. Chump Vinemare, shoot the opponent for 1, trigger Pia's Revolution. Is that better than playing Servo Schematic? Probably, since we're missing the Ravenous Intruder. And Blanchwood Armor, that's fine. As long as it doesn't have trample, we can chump it for days. Opponent takes the damage, so they're down to 8. And Zhalfirin Void is excellent here. So let's see what's on top. Implement of Combustion's tempting, but if we keep it on top, then we can go Scrap Trawler into Implement next turn, which is pretty appealing. And then sacrificing Implement gets us Walking Ballista back, so I guess we'll keep it on top. And then this turn we get to double Servo Schematic. Maybe Ballista plus Schematic is better. So we're only gonna chump the Vinemare. I think I'm fine taking 6 from the Thorn Lieutenant if our opponent wants to pump it. Since then next turn we can use a Servo token to chump Vinemare again, and we chump with Ballista or the Servo. Probably doesn't matter too much since we have another Ballista in the graveyard. So this seems fine. And we'll see if our opponent wants to pump the Thorn Lieutenant. They do. Alright, that's fine. So we'll take 6 down to 8. Alright, so we get to Scrap Trawler plus Implements. And say go. And then we'll see if we can maybe try and set up a kill for next turn. Depends what our opponent does here. So again, we're just gonna chump Vinemare, ping our opponent for 1. And see if they want to give us Walking Ballista back or not. Nope, opponent's down to 4. And they didn't even pump the Thorn Lieutenant, so they probably have another play. And it's a Ghalta. Yeah, Ghalta's a problem. So we need to be able to kill our opponent here. So can we get lethal here somehow? So if we sacrifice Implement, opponent's forced to give us the Implement back in our hand, otherwise they're dead. And then we get Ballista back. So we'll have 3 mana, draw a card from Implement, and a Ballista in hand, and then we'll have to go from there, I think. If we had more red mana, things would be easier. Alright, so our opponent's down to 3. If we had a Reckless Fireweaver in play, then we could win, since then we could play Ballista for 0, and our opponents, if they take 3, they're dead. If they give us Ballista back, we keep pinging them for 1. But we don't have a Reckless Fireweaver. So yeah, I'm not sure if we can get there here, since if we sacrifice Implement, and even if we draw the Fireweaver, we can't play it. Ballista for 1 doesn't get there. Guess we're sacrificing Implements, see what we draw. But I don't think we have any outs. And yep, there's a Fireweaver. So 1 land short here. If we had an extra land in play, then Fireweaver plus Ballista would be lethal with our opponent at 3 or less life. So very close. If Renegade Map was just an untapped land, we could get there. That's unfortunate. Oh well. So that's gonna do it. Let's go to sideboarding. So against the green deck, we want our disintegrations. And against that particular version, I don't even know if Abrade is great, since it doesn't kill Vinemare. Against Thorn Lieutenant, it's not amazing. And of course doesn't kill Ghalta, and also doesn't kill Steel Leaf Champion, so Abrade might not even be good enough against that version. So we probably just want the disintegrations, cutting Implement of Examination. And yeah, that's gonna do it. Would like to be on the play. And yeah, this seems okay. So this time we do have the Fireweaver alongside PS Revolution. So let's lead with Fireweaver into Revolution into Schematic plus Implement. If we can find a fourth land. Instead another Implement is pretty decent too. So we could go Servo Schematic plus Implement here. And maybe sneak in an attack with our Servo token along the way. But I imagine our opponent has Steel Leaf Champion here. Yep, since they didn't do anything earlier. And Steel Leaf Champion we cannot chump block that easily. Alright, so we found a land so we can PS Revolution into Sacrifice Implement. Seems okay. Next turn we can Revolution number 2 into Implement of Malice. Reclamation Sage, that's a good one. Blowing up our PS Revolution. And our opponent's not even attacking. So they're showing a lot of respect. Alright, let's play another Revolution. Into Implements. Say go. And a Cartouche of Strength to kill a Reckless Fireweaver. That's a decent one too. And now I imagine they're gonna go on the offensive. Reclamation Sage staying back. So we'll take 6 down to 14. Let's start by sacrificing the implements. And Ravenous Intruder was a great draw. Opponent discards Blanchwood Armor, which would be pretty good here on the Steel Leaf Champion. Let's play Intruder. Play Map. And I guess I'm fine attacking with the Servo token, since then our opponent won't be able to chump Ravenous Intruder with Reclamation Sage. Alright, that's fine. Thrashing Brontodon's unfortunate. So do we want to sacrifice anything in response? I guess we don't have to. Alright, they're gonna force the issue. So let's sacrifice Schematic. Alright, opponent takes the damage. And I think we're also sacrificing the Renegade Map here, which they might give us back, but then we have more food for the Ravenous Intruder, which is fine. And now we have a pretty big Ravenous Intruder to block the Steel Leaf Champion. And no attacks. And unlicensed disintegrations, excellent here. It's gonna win this game. Alright, sweet. So on to game 3 against the mono green. Don't think we change anything. We saw Reclamation Sage and Brontodon, not much we can do about those. Not too thrilled about any of our other sideboard options. Could potentially make room for even more copies of Disintegration in the sideboard, but the mana situation's a little bit sketchy to cast Disintegration on schedule. This hand's great. We've got Renegade Map to fix for blue, and then Psi is excellent, Disintegration's excellent. And a Thunderherd Migration for 3 mana. Opponent's ramping. Alright, so we can play a Ravenous Intruder here, or we can play another Renegade Map, but I'd rather keep the map for after Psi. Could also Walking Ballista, shoot down Llanowar Elves, definitely an option. So maybe killing the Llanowar Elves is the safer play here. Instead another Llanowar Elf, and nothing else. Alright, so their hand's pretty expensive. More Renegade Maps, not as good as lands would have been here, but I guess they go well with Psi, so I'm not gonna complain. And we'll play Psi. And then next turn we could potentially make a bunch of Thopter tokens. Another Migration for the full amount. I guess if our opponent had Gigantosaurus in hand, they would have cast Migration for 2. And yeah, still nothing from the opponent, so their hand's probably not great. And Reckless Fireweaver is pretty interesting too, so we can Fireweaver into Renegade Map here. Seems good. And Psi also triggers a Fireweaver. And we'll get in for 1, because why not? Alright, so next turn we can sacrifice Renegade Map, play Scrap Trawler plus Renegade Map. I guess we'll play the Scrap Trawler first so we can return Walking Ballista. And our opponent still nothing. So their hand must include cards like Galta that they're unable to cast here. So they might have kept a somewhat sketchy one. Maybe they have some enchantments that they don't want to deploy. Who knows? Alright, so first things first, play Scrap Trawler, trigger Psy. Then we can sacrifice Renegade Map, getting back Ballista. And then we can play another Renegade Map, triggering Psy again. And we'll get a mountain. And attack. Opponent takes it. And now this Ravenous Intruder is looking great with all these artifacts we can sacrifice. And yep, our opponent just scoops it up, so maybe an unfortunate draw on the opponent's part here. But we were definitely doing some powerful things and still had a disintegration just in case. So on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw. This hand looks okay. Can always play our Ballista on turn 2. And Implement is good too. Double Island go. Let's play our Zhalfirin Void. Bottom the land. Play Ballista on 1. Say go. Opponent cycles Compelling Arguments, so some sort of mill deck, but no play so far. Alright, I don't mind just playing the Scrap Trawler to get in for more damage as we attack. Scrap Trawler resolves, and our opponent cycles another Compelling Argument. So they're digging for something. Alright, the Sulfur falls, so they're blue-red. So maybe it's not a mill deck and it's just a random cycling card to put more instants and sorceries in their graveyard for some sort of Enigma Drake deck. Could be the case. Either way, it looks like playing the PS Revolution here is fine. Probably could have played Inventors Fair last turn to gain a life here, but forgot we had 3 artifacts in play already. And I guess now we messed up since we can't sacrifice the implement. That's okay. Still gonna play out PS Revolution here. Say go. And Illumination, that's fine. So yeah, we mis-sequenced our lands a little bit. Could have either gained more life or had red mana up to potentially sacrifice the implement here, or maybe even both. But that's a pretty small price to pay here. And our opponent's digging with all sorts of draw spells, so not sure what they're looking for. It's on tap, gain a life, and implement's pretty good too. So I think we can attack, and then we can shoot our opponent with the Walking Ballista, and then sacrifice the implement to get Walking Ballista back from the graveyard if they decide not to give us the Walking Ballista. Or they can just give us the Ballista back, I suppose, since we don't have a Reckless Fireweaver or Psy in play, which nets us an advantage whenever we play Ballista for 0. Alright, but our opponent did decide to take the damage there, so that's good. So we get to return Walking Ballista, and Ravenous Intruder was good too. Opponent gives us the implement back this time. Alright, so probably want to play Servo Schematic plus Intruder here is my guess. Alright, so we can attack our opponent for lethal next turn pretty easily, but I'm sure we could also win just by looping Ballista's implements with Scrap Trawler. Sweltering Suns, alright, so can sacrifice the Servo token for sure, and then we're probably fine sacrificing the Servo Schematic as well. I guess we're getting it in our hands either way here. So maybe that wasn't necessary. Yeah, would rather have a Servo Schematic in play than in our hand, I guess. I was thinking of getting Scrap Trawler value, but doesn't really matter here. Get our Scrap Trawler back anyways. Alright, let's play a Servo Schematic. Play another one Play Implement. Attack. And our opponent actually had the blink of an eye. Alright, so no lethal damage this turn. Guess we're just sacrificing the implement now. So maybe got a little bit too hasty there. Could have played around the bounce effect by not playing both servo schematics and just one of them, and then we would have been able to replay the intruder here. But either way, our opponent's pretty dead. Alright, so on to sideboarding against a blue-red control. So we want our Negates, our Duresses, and our Hope of Ghirapur probably. Although that one I'm less sure about since it's pretty weak against Sweltering Suns. And then Karn's probably pretty decent too. And then what do we take out? Against bounce spells, the Ravenous Intruder is not amazing. So I could see shaving some of those. And then maybe just shave a bunch of Fireweavers and Ballista. And just go down on the number of copies on some cards. This hand seems fine. Alright, Revolution was a good draw. So we're looking at turn 2 Servo Schematic potentially, turn 3 either Psi or Revolution. Opponent cycling Illumination main phase, so trying to hit their land drops perhaps. Alright, let's attack for 1. We could play around a counterspell here, although we haven't seen any counterspells out of the opponent yet. But I'm sure they probably have some in their deck. I think PS Revolution might actually be better in this matchup. So we'll give them Psi. And gets Countervailing Winds. Alright. Next turn we can go Revolution into a 1-drop and search for Ascanta, that's fine. Ooh, Ravenous Intruder too. I think I like resolving the PS Revolution here. And I'm probably just playing the Renegade Map so we can keep developing our mana. Since a blue-red deck is going to struggle to deal with the resolved PS Revolution. Abrade goes to the graveyard. Opponent says go. Alright, so let's start by sacrificing Renegade Map. Opponent gives it back. Get a swamp. Alright, let's attack for 1. Play Ravenous Intruder. Play Implements. Play Renegade Map. Say go. Keeping up Implement activation. It's gonna be Illumination, that's fine. So we're still not sure what the opponent's win condition is exactly. Blink of an eye on PS Revolution. Let's respond by sacrificing it. Do we sacrifice anything else here? I guess I'll sacrifice the Servo Schematic here. So our opponent might have a Negate in hand, which is the reason why they want to bounce the Revolution so they can counter it on the way back. Alright, opponent takes the damage. And we'll let this resolve. Untap. And Reckless Fireweaver is pretty good too. The issue with playing Weaver into Schematic is that we then don't get to play Revolution, but I guess that's okay. So let's play Fireweaver. Play Schematic. And attack. So we could go for the kill here, and our opponent did already use a blink, so I don't mind going for it here. And it's not even a big investment. So this is 7, can let damage happen. And see what the opponent does, and they're just dead. Awesome, so pretty quick win here with a Ravenous Intruder. I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this gameplay. And as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.